Planning Commission, and for the staff who are staying late to help us keep the lights on and the PowerPoint running. I wanted to engage people on this. This is a question that we've posed here and invited some really interesting speakers on how can we ensure that sharing the opportunity to live in walkable, transit-oriented neighborhoods can be shared across people of all incomes. And we're going to ask Chris Lineberger, David Bowers, and Ed Lazier to address that question. We'll first have each speaker do their own discussion of this, some presentations, and then leave ample time for questions and discussion at the end of the event. And I also wanted to note, if you didn't sign in when you came in, please do, to make sure that we can keep you on our list and let you know about future events. And if you need to use the restrooms, you need a code which is posted on the desk on the way out the door to the restrooms. So first, I wanted to introduce Chris Lineberger, our first speaker tonight. Chris is a land use strategist, teacher, developer, researcher, author, who is looking at balancing the business realities with social and environmental concerns. He's most recently published a study through Brookings Institution where he's a fellow called Walk This Way, the Economic Promise of Walkable Places in Metropolitan Washington, D.C. And in addition to his posting at Brookings, he is a president of Locus, which is a national network of real estate developers and investors who advocate for sustainable, walkable urban development in America's metropolitan areas. And Locus is involved in policy policy debates at the federal and state level, and in partnership with Smart Growth America, a national organization. In addition to these hats, Chris is the Charles Bennett Distinguished Scholar and Research Professor at George Washington University School of Business, and the founding partner of Arcadia Land Company, a new urbanism and transit-oriented development firm. And if you didn't know, Chris is the author of numerous books and publications, including The Option of Urbanism, and many other wonderful publications. So we're really privileged to have Chris lead things off for us. Chris?
Well, it's good to be in my hometown. Last week I was in Ohio on a tour, a speaking tour, and so it's nice to be able to talk about this topic here in my own backyard. I actually moved here now 7 years ago. My wife and I were living in Santa Fe, and we had raised our kids there, and we could live any place in the country, and we started looking around, saying, so what's next? And all my research showed that Metro DC was the model by which we're building this country. That there was more examples of what the research was demonstrating was the future of our country here in Metro DC. So I wanted to be right on the cutting edge, right on the front line of how we're building the country. And so we moved to DuPont, Colorado. And at first, of course, I was at Brookings, but I was also teaching at the University of Michigan. And the students would come to me, but I'd have to go out there once in a while. And so Doug Guthrie, about a year and a half ago, who's the dean at GW at the business school, comes up to me and says, Lineberger, why are you even thinking about Michigan? You live 9 blocks from the campus. And that, of course, sold me on moving what I do to GW. So I now have the distinct privilege of walking literally to all 3 places that I have any sort of thing to do with. And a day like today, I went to all 3 places and ended up coming down here at the end of the day. It's perfectly lovely. So I want to lay out first what this future looks like in very schematic terms, and then talk about this really quite crucial issue of how can we really address affordable housing. It is the unintended consequence of success, and we have a serious responsibility to really address this in a conscious fashion. Because keep in mind what the affordable housing strategy is of our country today. Anybody guess what the policy is?
Not much.
Actually, it's drive until you qualify. That if you just keep on driving another 10, 20 miles, you'll eventually find something that you can afford. And all the greenhouse gases that you spew out, and the fact that you're taking all that time away from your family, and the fact that you're spending on average 25% of your household income on a fleet of cars to participate in society is the price we pay. And that 25%, by the way, leaves DC, leaves the local economy, and goes to Detroit, Stuttgart, or Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. So there's all sorts of reasons why this affordable housing question is absolutely crucial. But going back to the top, want to just, again, lay out schematically why this is happening. Why is the future of real estate walkable urban development? There are only two ways of building the built environment. One is referred to as drivable suburban, and we all know what that is, but it's very low density. Every product is separated from one another, and the only way to get between all those products is, of course, by car. And during the late 20th century, we in this country pioneered that, and we in real estate, as a real estate developer, and prior to that, I owned and ran a company called Robert Charles Lesser and Company, which is the largest real estate consulting firm in the country. I sold it about 12 years ago. It's right now headquartered in Bethesda, but it does work throughout North America, telling real estate developers what to do. And during the late 20th century, what we were telling real estate developers to do was build drivable suburban, because that's what the market wanted. But in the mid-90s, somewhere in the mid-90s, we began to see that the pendulum was beginning to move backward, that the market was beginning to demand the other way of building, walkable urban. And walkable urban is at least 5, 10, even 20 times more dense than drivable suburban. It was mixed use, or a mix of uses, all within walking distance. Now, there's lots of ways to get there. You can get there by car. Cars are still important. You can get there by rail transit, bus. Bicycling is very, very important. And of course, you can do what I now do, is walk to get there. But once you're at these places, it's walkable. And now, remember that walking is that we as humans, for the last, 6,000 years, we only want to walk about 1,500 to 3,000 feet before we look for a different way of getting around. So you go back to your high school geometry, pi r squared, and you run the numbers, and you realize that a walkable urban place is only about 100 to 500 acres in size. These are constrained in size based upon their walkability. That's why they need to be high density. That's why they are constrained in size. And that's why they are the antidote for sprawl. So if you were to take a look at Metro DC, and you would understand that there's two ways of building the built environment, drivable suburban, walkable urban. Then the other thing to understand is that there are two economic uses of land. One is local serving. These are bedroom communities, 90% residential, 10% commercial that supports that residential. This is where most of us live. Or regionally significant. Regionally significant is employment concentration, civic centers, urban entertainment, eds and meds. This is basically where we make our living and spend our major dollars on regionally significant retail, such as regional malls. So when you take those two dimensions, you can create a simple four-cell matrix. So as I mentioned earlier, the bulk of what we did in the late 20th century was build drivable suburban, either local serving, i.e. bedroom communities, this is basically housing subdivisions, or we were building what Joel Garreau came to call edge cities. These low-density, drivable suburban places where the wealth was created, out in the suburbs. Obviously, Tyson's is the poster child of a edge city in this country, in the world. It's the largest in the world. Or, White Flint, the Dulles Corridor, the rest. But as I say, in the mid-90s, we began to see that the pendulum was swinging back and the market was demanding something different. And by the way, I know who to blame for this. We know who to point the blame for. It's the damn kids. Those of you that are in your 20s, early 30s, it's your fault for this. And that, we baby boomers were raised on Leave It to Beaver, Dick Van Dyke, the Brady Bunch, all set in the suburbs. And this is a reflection of what we wanted. Hollywood does more consumer research than anybody else. This was our aspirations. Well, what the kids were raised on was, of course, Seinfeld, Friends, Sex and the City, How I Met Your Mother, and all set in walkable urban places. This is a reflection of what we want. There's a lot of research that backs us up. All of Richard Florida's work, a lot of the stuff out of Brookings, Chris Nelson, you go down the list, lots of research backs this stuff up, that the market has fundamentally changed. And you, young people, you're to blame. So we started building these walkable urban neighborhoods, or reclaiming existing walkable urban neighborhoods, which is really what we're talking about tonight. The headline here is Petworth and other places like Petworth were down in the dumps, Columbia Heights, down in the dumps as far as valuations 15, 20 years ago. Now they're among the most expensive places in the region. How'd that happen? It's because of this pendulum switching, the fundamental market shift. And so we saw this in our local serving walkable urban neighborhoods, and we also saw it in the regionally significant walkable urban places. Now, the shorthand that I've come up with for walkable urban places, the old shorthand, as you can imagine, walkable urban places, whoops, didn't have great marketing appeal. So somebody smarter and more creative than me came up with walk-ups to talk about these regionally significant walkable urban places. So these four cells capture 100% of the land use in any metropolitan area. Now, my research at Brookings and at GW has really focused on regionally significant walkable urban places. So I'm going to give you a little research and then, so here is Metro DC. You know it well. That there are 6 types of regionally significant walk-ups. First, our downtown. Everybody, all places have a downtown. And this is both downtown and Golden Triangle act as our downtown. My favorite are downtown adjacent places surrounding downtown. These are places that lower density, different character, different economic drivers, but they surround downtown. The amazing thing about DC from a market demand point of view, many of these places were not only in the dump, I knew even before I moved here, I would get back to DC at least once every couple months. And walking through downtown DC, you felt like you were taking your life in your hands back 15, 20 years ago. And we know what's happened here now as far as the explosion and the amazing gentrification. Well, the same thing's happening to the downtown adjacent places. Obviously you all know about NOMA. It was the site of the riots. I was just there this morning for lunch. And when you stand back and look at the numbers, Center City, DC, because of the height limit and because of this boom, the downtown and downtown adjacent places are built out in 15 years. They're done. Downtown itself has 5% more to grow. Then it's over. And that 5% includes putting a lid on the freeway, 395, which should have never been built. But they're going to put a lid over it at great expense to put another couple million square feet on top of it. So, incredibly expensive space because of that pent-up demand for great walkable urbanism in downtown. The third type of place is urban commercial. These are places that were local serving retail and commercial 100 years ago. The neighborhood went into decline. Now many of them are coming back as regionally significant walkable urban places. So obviously U Street, Adams Morgan, and now of course the emergence of H Street. Now, those are the places that those are the walk-ups that are in the center city. There are 3 types that are in the suburbs, and the reason Metro DC is the leader in this country, not New York, is because we have so much walkable urban places in the suburbs. That's the big difference between here and any other metro in the country. When I first came out with this survey from Brookings about 4 years ago showing that DC had more walkable urban places than any place else, very first phone call was from the New York Post yelling at me, saying, "What do you mean? New York's the most walkable." And I said, "Absolutely, Manhattan is." And that's where 8% of you live like Tony or live like Seinfeld. 92% of the 20 million people that are in that New York metropolitan area live like Tony Soprano out in northern New Jersey and out on Long Island. They don't have much in any, almost no walkable urban places in the suburbs. We are riddled with them. We have lots. It's a very, very exciting place. So the first type are suburban town centers. So that would be like Bethesda, Silver Spring, Boston. The second type, and the most important for the next generation, is the conversion of strip commercial into walkable urban places. And the 2 biggest and most important in the country, naturally, one is Tyson's because it's so much of just a giant, but the other one is, of course, White Flint. And both of these drivable suburban neighborhoods are becoming regionally significant walk-ups. They're very exciting, and there's so much to be learned from them. And oh, by the way, the great thing about this, which I'm going to touch on just in 1 second, is that much of the infrastructure for both of those places, as far as the redevelopment, is being paid for by real estate developers. And that's something which we need to talk about as far as affordable housing as well. And then the last type is greenfield developments. These are places that you just add water and poof, instant urbanity. We're not going to see too many of these. The most recent one is a National Harbor. And I know that a lot of you urbanists look down your nose at National Harbor and Reston Town Center, but there's a market for this stuff. I personally wouldn't be caught dead there. But there is a market for Disney-fied urbanism. And the only thing I can say that if you are skeptical, give it 40, 50 years, and it'll actually have some character. But right now, it's a distinct market. But why we're not going to see too many of these is just talk to Milt Peterson, who's the developer of National Harbor, who's one wild and crazy guy. And phase 1 of National Harbor cost a mere $3.5 billion, almost all privately funded. And Milt says nobody's crazy enough to do that again. So we're not going to see too many of those. Now, the other thing to note, and this really gets to the issue of affordable housing, well, this plays into it. Of course, 80%, there are 43 regionally significant walk-ups in Metro DC, 43, of which only 42% are in the center city, 58% are in the suburbs. That's the power of Metro DC. Arlington basically is the power. I mean, that's the great model, as you all know. And 80% of them are rail transit served. That's not a coincidence. And by the way, those 43 places, if you total them up, they add up to 17,500 acres, which is 1% of the total land mass of the region. Now, I've not done the research on the local serving walk-ups yet, but at best, and I think I'm being very optimistic, there were no more than 9% of the land mass is in local serving walk-ups. So we're talking about where the bulk of real estate development wants to go over the next 30 years is in 10% of our land mass. We don't have to touch the other 90%. And so why are we building any additional infrastructure? It's mad. I mean, for drivable suburban is mad. We should be focusing all of our infrastructure on the walkable urban places because that's where the market wants to go. Now, the other crucial thing to note about all metro areas, not just DC, if you know 3 things about any metropolitan area in this country, you can figure out how they've grown over the last 60, 70 years. Number 1, where is the white upper middle income housing concentration? All tends to be on the same side of town, where all the country clubs are and all the high-end shopping got developed and all the high-end prep schools are. And number two is, where's the local minority housing? Tends to be on the other side of town. And number three is, where did the freeways go? And if you know those three things, you can tell where is the favored quarter, the favored 90-degree arc coming out of downtown, where 80–90% of all job growth went over the last half century. And so Atlanta grows to the north, Kansas City and Denver grow to the south, Seattle grows to the east. Now, of course, topography does matter, because it couldn't grow to the west unless you wanted to tread water a lot. But obviously, DC grows to the northwest. And as my colleague at Brookings, Alice Rivlin, talked about, that we have a phenomenal east-west divide, just as Atlanta has a north-south divide, just as Denver has a south-north divide. So the favored quarter is where much of this growth went. But the really interesting thing, and one of the most impressive things, and again, the reason I came to DC, is that we're just now beginning to see the expansion of the favored quarter into the northeast and southeast. And if somebody had said that this would happen 10 years ago, you would be committed. That in essence, the green line is the new red line. This is where the growth has to go, because the red line's the oldest line. It's the most overcapacity. It's obviously, we all know it's breaking down pretty regularly. And the green line's the newest line with the most capacity and access to the cheapest housing. So it's a very exciting thing to see the expansion. From a social equity point of view, this is the most important trend of our time. Now, I talked about the 6 types of walk-ups, just going through them, just recapping. Our downtown, downtown adjacent, surrounding downtown, urban commercial, then out in the suburbs, suburban town center, strip commercial redevelopment, and greenfield development. So here's one of the best examples. Again, if you want to understand strip commercial, you got to know Arlington. They have 8 regionally significant walk-ups in Arlington, in the smallest county in the country as far as physical size, landmass. And a great example is, of course, Clarendon. Here is a shot of Clarendon showing the old Sears store when it was vacant back in the mid-'80s. They went out to the mall, went out to the freeway. Here's a shot of it today, same location. To the right is the Apple store, straight ahead is Whole Foods, and up above are condos that sell for between $500 and $600 per square foot. This is just a remarkable turnaround based upon what was there before. And 2 blocks north and south of this same location, it goes back into single-family housing. And these single-family housing on a price per square foot basis is the most expensive single-family housing in all of Arlington. And why is that so? And why? And this is one of the great things that we will all use to help NIMBY opposition understand why smart growth is so good for them. Because they have the best of 2 worlds. They can live in suburbia and walk to great urbanism. As a result, their housing prices, my research has shown, has a 40 to 100% price per square foot premium over comparable housing in the same school district, the same town, but it's drivable to this kind of urbanism. The other thing that's happened, the 8 walkable urban places in Arlington represents 10% of the total land use in the county. 20 years ago, that represents 20% of the tax base of the county, and falling for obvious reasons. The Sears left. So did a lot of other folks. All the car dealers they're in Boston, they left, leaving vacant lots. Property tax, all the other taxes were cratering in this 10%. Today, it's 55% of the tax base. They went through this great recession hardly feeling it, including continuing to invest in affordable housing, cash into their very progressive affordable housing program. And they also, therefore, could have one of the best public school systems in the country. And Arlington is not, Arlington's not Bethesda. This is not where where it's traditionally been a high-end place and an all-white kind of place. This has been a middle-class, very mixed demographic place that's achieved a remarkable turnaround because they've embraced smart growth. And the quality of life has increased, therefore housing values increase. Therefore, their affordable housing problem has also increased. And they, thank goodness, recognize it. So when you take my recent research that just came out, looked at those 43 walkable urban places, the for sale housing in these places averaged $380 per square foot compared to the typical walkable urban house in this region, $222 per square foot. That's a 71% price premium of walkable urban over drivable suburban. Now, it wasn't always that way. The thing that if you have any gray hair, you will remember 20, 30 years ago what it was like. Here is a comparison, but on the left is 1996, on the right is 2011, comparing Foggy Bottom and the housing market on a price per square foot basis in Foggy Bottom versus McLean. McLean in 1996 had a 25% price premium over Foggy Bottom. And if you go back another 15 years, we don't have that data, it would probably be 100% price premium of McLean over Foggy Bottom. Today, the West End, Foggy Bottom, has a 50% price premium over McLean. The lines have crossed. This is the market saying we want something fundamentally different than what was built 20, 30 years ago. That walkable urban places are now more valuable than drivable suburban, otherwise known as gentrification. Now, gentrification as a term is either the most loved or the most hated term in real estate. Depends on where you stand or sit. And there's two reasons for gentrification. Walkable urban development just costs more to build. Drivable suburban stuff are sticks and spray-on facade as far as the cost of construction. It's pretty cheap to build drivable suburban product. Walkable urban product is higher. It has real architecture because it's right up to the street. It can't be a spray-on facade. It's got real foundations. It's not just floating foundations. It is a much more, it's a 50 to 100% price premium on a price per square foot basis to build walkable urban product. So that's one reason. And that's just life. Deal with it. Most of us deal with it by taking smaller space. And we're happy to take it because the other thing we get in a walkable urban environment is a great outdoors of, great restaurants and just great amenities within walking distance. So we're fine to move from a 4,000 square foot home to a 1,500 square foot place in a walkable urban place because it's a lifestyle choice and there's a lot of other things outside the home that are really part of our life. But the other reason, and the major reason for gentrification, the major reason, is land prices. Now, keep in mind that this country has a lot of land. We stole this land fair and square, and we've got a lot of it. And sprawl the entire thing about sprawl has been that we use it at very low density, throw it away, and move on. That's what sprawl has allowed us to do. So that's why, Metro DC is 1/2 the population of Metro Paris and twice the size of Metro Paris. So we're at 1/4 the density of Metro Paris because we have a lot of land and we can burn it. So why do we have increased land values? It is because we don't have enough walkable urban land. So that is the number one way we're going to deal with affordable housing is building more walkable urban places. And this is what I mean. This is a piece of land, and you can't see it very well. I just made this slide. This is the Capitol Riverfront, down by the ballpark. Here's one of the metro stations, or one of the entrances. This is a piece of land, 29,000 square feet. And this is what it looks like today. It's unbuilt upon, next to now some recently built places. 10, 12 years ago, if you remember Capitol Riverfront, it was a place you wouldn't be caught dead in. Then again, you might have been. It was a really nasty, there were 19 murders in this police district in the previous year. And prior to that very dysfunctional housing project getting torn down. And that land was worth at best $5 a square foot. That's what somebody would pay for it, and they would probably store gravel on it or some other low value use. This piece of dirt in May of last year closed. It was sold to Toll Brothers, one of the largest, highest end home builders in the country, New York Stock Exchange, for a mere $825 a square foot. I have never seen a piece of land over a 10, 12-year period go up from $5 a foot to $825 a foot. That is stunning. And it's that increase that is another way that we're going to take advantage and find sources to pay for affordable housing. So let me just close by going through a little quiver of arrows that we can use. These are 12 ideas. There's probably 24 ideas that we can use to how to craft a conscious affordable housing strategy for each of our walkable urban places. Conscious as opposed to the current strategy, as I mentioned earlier, of drive until you qualify. First is, of course, we have federal and sometimes state tax credits. A very popular program. It satisfies the needs of about 10% of what the market's looking for. That the federal government just does not make anywhere near enough tax credits available for low-income housing. Another one is a great one, choice communities. What used to be called Hope 6. These are mixed income public housing projects, 60% market rate, 40% affordable. Much better than the dysfunctional housing projects that became, terrible slums back in the late 20th century. Another is, of course, inclusionary zoning, if it's done right. As we know in this town, it's not been done right, and we are working on refining it. There's a task force looking at the affordable housing in this town. But inclusionary zoning is a very simple thing if it's done right, because basically it lowers land values if you spread it out over a large area. Montgomery County is one of the best models in the country because it applies to the entire county. Next one is a fee upon resale of any market rate unit. I'm just about to move from a townhouse to a flat, all of 1.5 blocks away, and I'll be contributing tens of thousands of dollars into this fund. The problem with that is that when you're in a real estate slump, there's no cash flow. It only comes when you can sell housing, and that's, real estate's a boom-bust business. Next is impact fees. But again, only happens when you're building. When you're not building, there are no impact fees that you can charge. The other good thing about impact fees is that they charge sprawl for what it actually costs. Sprawl costs, and I don't have time to go into this, but sprawl costs anywhere from 10 to 20 times more on a price per square foot basis as far as what it can support than walkable urban infrastructure, and that includes rail transit. The other thing, which is, this one's simple, but Montgomery County's been fighting it, and a lot of other places have been fighting this, which is, of course, having granny flats. Turn your basement into a unit that you can rent. There's a great show on HGTV, Property Brothers, who go into these townhouses, generally up in Canada, and redo the basements to help the young homeowners have more income from their property. And it rents to, generally, the carpenter, the school teacher who needs affordable housing. But it's generally illegal in this country. Not in this town, but certainly in many of the counties surrounding this town. Next is location-efficient mortgages, which takes into account the fact that walkable urban households, on average, only spend 9% of their household income on transportation. Drivable suburban, as I mentioned earlier, spend 25%. If you're a walkable urban place, you can afford a bigger mortgage. The bigger one, though, as far as long-term, is what I mentioned earlier, is create more walkable urban places to drive down land values. You know, a DuPont Circle townhouse has, you know, a massive 1,500 square feet underneath of it, and it's worth about $1 million. That's silly. There is no reason. That's that increased land value because we don't have enough walkable urban places. We need to focus all these tax programs on walkable urban places, and Locus and Smart Growth America is doing this right now. I'm editing a policy paper for our effort as far as tax reform on the Hill this year to focus all the tax programs that we have on walkable urban places. We need to build out the infrastructure to allow for walkable urban places to emerge, what's known as building the second half of the transportation system. We've already built the freeways. Let's not do that anymore. We're going to have a hard enough time maintaining them. We need to build the rail transit, bike, and walking infrastructure. We need to encourage employers, particularly in this town, the U.S. government, to only move to transit-oriented locations so their employees can get to work using transit. And then finally, I'm going to end with this one, value capture. The concept of capturing the upside, that $5 to $825, a portion of it, to pay for affordable housing. And in essence, how it works is, over time, this is 20 years, a walkable urban place cash flows much better in the mid to long term. And the issue is, if you can capture a piece of that upside in the mid to long term, you can use that money to service debt that you raise in year zero to build the affordable housing, and then pay for it with the upside of the walkable urban places. So, you know, capturing, you know, 20% of that $5 to $825 over 10 years, you could build a lot of affordable housing by capturing that upside. And that's something which the developers I work with are willing to do. I had to beat them up to get them to that point, but they are willing to do it because they understand that we need to build more transit, we need to build more affordable housing. There's a limit to what the public can do. The private sector has to participate. So there's a lot of solutions here. And if we know where the bulk of real estate value is going to be created over the next 20 years, and we can't figure out a way to take advantage, it's only going to be 10% of the land in this region. It's going to be where the vast majority of growth is going to go. We know that. We have the playbook. And if we know that and cannot take advantage of that knowledge to capture value, to fund conscious affordable housing strategies, shame on us. Thank you very much.